Cavaleir de Sainte-Croix was the kind of man France kept hidden in its cellars, a noble on paper but a shadow in reality, a quiet aristocrat with the face of a saint in the hands of a chemist who understood far too well how easily God's grace could be replaced with poison, born into a world where courtiers whispered more murders than prayers, and where power flowed not only through treaties and swords, but also through the contents of small glass vials. Sainte-Croix rose not through brilliance or birthright, but through a peculiar talent, the ability to dissolve enemies without leaving stains. He was elegant, fragile-looking, pale, with polite eyes and the kind of aristocratic detachment that made him completely invisible at court, which in the death-ridden Paris of the 17th century was the most dangerous camouflage of all. He was the lover of the infamous Marquise de Brinvilliers, a noblewoman charming enough to distract an entire room while her accomplice prepared the real entertainment. Paris at that time was a cauldron of old magic, new science, superstition, and desperation. Plague-ridden streets, brothels next to monasteries, nobles drinking chocolate in salons while surgeons amputated limbs downstairs, priests warning of the devil while half the aristocracy secretly visited alchemists for powders of inheritance. Into this world stepped Sainte-Croix, part scientist, part criminal, part ghost. No one knew exactly when he became fascinated with poisons. Perhaps it was in the labyrinth of Parisian apothecaries, where alchemists sold liquids promising immortality, but delivering death. Perhaps it was during whispered lessons from Giovanni Vincenzo, a shady Italian expert whose medicines healed no one, but made many disappear. Or perhaps, as some whispered, Sainte-Croix simply realized that Paris was a place where murder, discreetly done, was not a sin, but a social skill. What is certain is that by the time he met the Marquise de Brinvilliers, Sainte-Croix had already become a connoisseur of toxins, arsenic, antimony, mercurial compounds, herbal concoctions that acted slowly enough to mimic illness, fast enough to prevent suspicion. The Marquise, restless, spoiled, bored with her husband, thirsty for excitement and inheritance, saw in him not just a lover, but a partner in crime. Together they formed one of the most infamous duos in French criminal history, but Parisian nobility did not tolerate scandal unless they could control it, and Sainte-Croix was not careful. He dueled a man of higher status, a crime more serious than poisoning someone quietly, and was arrested by order of Cardinal Mazarin. In prison, instead of rotting, he flourished. There he met the alchemist Exili, a man with a talent for creating death that looked like divine will. Exili trained Sainte-Croix in the art of invisible killing, slow poisons that imitated natural illness, left no visible traces, and ensured victims died while thanking their assassins for visiting. When Sainte-Croix finally left prison, he was no longer merely dangerous, he was educated. He established a laboratory hidden above his apartment on Rue de la Vieille Draperie, a place filled with vials, powders, retorts, metal furnaces, strange scents, burned glass, and notebooks full of formulas describing agony in elegant handwriting. The Marquise visited him often, entering disguised, exiting with new vials and new ideas. The two of them began poisoning people the way other nobles organized parties, casually, experimentally, with quiet sophistication. The first targets were the Marquise's own family. Her father suddenly fell ill and died in agony after eating pastries she had lovingly baked. Her brothers became sick for months, their health deteriorating slowly, doctors confused, relatives praying, servants whispering. A pattern appeared, but only in hindsight. Friends, relatives, servants, tenants all encountered mysterious symptoms shortly after sharing food or drink with the charming Marquise. It was said she practiced by visiting hospitals, bringing sweets to the poor, poisoning them just to study how different doses worked on different bodies. Whether this was truth or legend, She became one of the most feared women in Paris without anyone knowing it. Meanwhile, Comte Sainte-Croix watched from behind the curtains, perfecting formulas, adjusting ingredients, creating poisons invisible to even the most suspicious physicians. But fate has a dark sense of humor. In 1672, Sainte-Croix died unexpectedly in his own laboratory, possibly while testing a toxin too strong even for his expertise. Some claimed a vial exploded, releasing a cloud of poison. Others believe mercury fumes slowly killed him. Whatever happened, when authorities broke into his laboratory, they discovered something that terrified even hardened officials: shelves of poison labeled neatly, lists of victims, letters from the Marquise begging for more doses, formulas, diaries, even a sealed box addressed to her husband containing vials and instructions on how to identify her crimes. It was the medieval equivalent of opening someone's phone and finding every incriminating message ever written. The scandal exploded like gunpowder. The Marquise fled Paris, but was hunted down, dragged back, interrogated, forced to confess. And in her confessions, one name appeared again and again: Sainte-Croix, the quiet man behind her crimes, her teacher, her lover, her alchemist of death. People now remembered his calm voice, his small, polite smile, his fragile posture, the very things that had allowed him to kill unnoticed. His reputation transformed instantly, from charming nobleman to demonic chemist. In reality, Sainte-Croix was neither demon nor genius. He was something far more terrifying, an ordinary man who discovered that poison gave him more power than birth, education, or noble blood ever could. He understood the darkest principle of the 17th century, that death, delivered discreetly, ruled nations more effectively than armies. And Paris was the perfect ecosystem for such a creature, a city where nobles prayed loudly and murdered quietly, where doctors misdiagnosed everything, where the church blamed Satan for symptoms caused by arsenic, where the poor had no voice, and where the powerful were too busy poisoning each other to notice someone like Sainte-Croix drifting through their shadows. Even after his death, the shockwaves of his actions reshaped France. His laboratory became evidence in the affair of the poisons, the massive scandal implicating nobles, priests, witches, fortune tellers, and even the mistress of the king, Madame de Montespan. Sainte-Croix became the spark that ignited paranoia throughout the entire court of Louis XIV. Everyone suddenly suspected everyone. Servants feared employers, kings feared lovers, nobles feared dinner invitations, apothecaries were watched, alchemists were hunted, women selling powders at markets were arrested, and Paris discovered a horrifying truth: poison was the most democratic weapon in history. Anyone could kill with it. Without him, the affair of the poisons might never have erupted. Without him, Louis XIV wouldn't have created special courts for occult crimes. Without him, hundreds of innocent and guilty alike wouldn't have burned or been exiled. Sainte-Croix's shadow hung over France long after his body turned to dust, and yet historically he remained strangely overlooked, overshadowed by the Marquise and the scandals she admitted to. But he was the architect, the inventor, the chemist, the ghost. What makes him terrifying is not what he did. Countless killers have murdered more than he ever did, but how he did it, quietly, elegantly, scientifically, without rage, without passion, without remorse. He represents the birth of modern forensic fear, the realization that a man who smiles gently, who speaks softly, who writes formulas by candlelight, can devastate families, collapse noble houses, spark national scandals, and haunt a king's dreams. He is the kind of villain history forgets too quickly. Not a warlord, not a tyrant, not a king, but something far subtler and more unsettling: the mind behind the murderer. The man who proved that death delivered through a pinch of powder could be more powerful than death delivered by 1,000 swords. And that is why Cavaleir de Sainte-Croix remains one of the darkest figures of 17th century France, not because he killed, but because he taught others how.